What are you willing to accept to make life worth living? Sometimes that means accepting that your child is an addict and that you can't help them. And you have to accept that they might die in order for you to have a life worth living. That's some really serious acceptance.
I have never occurred for myself as an anxious person until the last few years. There's a certain thing that when I'm in that environment, it's making me anxious, and I don't know why. And I've never talked to anybody about it. And so I think it'd be interesting to pretend or just do like a little mini therapy session with you, let you ask questions and see what this would look like in practice. What is the worst bout of anxiety that you've personally experienced?
You know, when I was at the worst of my alcoholism, my anxiety was through the roof, and it was like I couldn't medicate it fast enough, and it was just a vicious cycle.
What do you remember, a night or an experience where it just got so out of control that...
I mean, every day. My son was 3 at the time, and I remember on Thursdays I would always have the morning off because I worked in the evenings, and I would always take my son to daycare, and I would just cry the entire way home because I knew that I was taking him there so I could go back and go home.
Rachael DeConing, welcome back to the Roller Coaster Podcast.
Thank you.
So I want to pick up here. I want to have a discussion around anxiety as it pertains to past experiences. How much of, like I love this concept of the only thing that's real is what's happening right here, right now.
Yeah.
What happened yesterday is not real. What happens tomorrow is not real. The past and the future are a glorified figment of our imagination, right? Mm-hmm. And can be useful, for sure, but can also be pretty harmful.
Sure.
And so is the root or majority of all anxiety that we experience a result of dwelling on the past or the future?
I think more future, for sure. There's people who say, depression is more dwelling on the past, anxiety is more dwelling on the future. I think it's a little more complicated than that. I do think, though, with anxiety, there's always a piece of the future involved, even if it's like, this piece of my past has made me now afraid of this thing in my future. There's always a future aspect of it. Whereas depression, because of the apathy and hopelessness involved in depression, usually it's more like, I don't care. I don't care about the future, a lot of shame, which is also true of anxiety as well. But anxiety definitely has that piece of, I'm projecting something into the future. Obviously it's imagined because the future is not anything we can predict.
Yeah. Similar, I had this epiphany happen that's similar to what we had talked about earlier with alcoholism. The ultimate consequence to anxiety and depression is also death, right? And so is there any correlation between those two? Like
anxiety and depression, or?
Yeah, I wonder why many things that we experience in our lives, like the ultimate consequence is not death. It happens to be that with addiction and also with anxiety and depression. I wonder what the tie-in is there.
My first thoughts, I'm just going to kind of spitball here, is that anxiety, for a lot of people with anxiety, now I also work with a lot of OCD, a lot of health anxiety. And so for a lot of people, they actually fear death until they have feared themselves out, as I might say, to where they don't care anymore. Because here's what I think about, anxiety. And if we're talking about depression in the majority of the way that I see it as an anxiety specialist, it's as a result of the anxiety.
Yeah.
Or it's correlated, caused, whatever you want to call it. And so I feel like for a lot of people, the fear has become so unbearably uncomfortable, miserable way of living that death actually does not feel that bad anymore. And so when I think about death as you're talking about it, I'm thinking of So oftentimes when I talk about acceptance with my anxiety clients, I talk about radical acceptance, which is this idea of like, what are you willing to accept to make life worth living? Because so many people, when I see them, they're living a life that's not even worth living. And so, yeah, it may not kill them physically, but they're living in such a miserable way that it almost doesn't feel that scary to die anymore. Yeah. And then that's when you get into depression and suicide and there's of course a lot of shame involved. And so we just talk about like, what are you willing to accept in order to have a life worth living? Sometimes that means accepting that your child is an addict and that you can't help them. And you have to accept that they might die in order for you to have a life worth living. That's some really serious acceptance. But I work with a lot of family members of addicts, and that's often what acceptance involves. And so, yeah, to me, when you talk about death, I'm sure there's the suicides and that, and also the anxiety that leads to addiction that then leads to death or so on and so forth. But I'm also thinking of the people who, fortunately don't struggle with addiction, but they're not leaving their house. They're not connecting with other people. They're spending every day afraid, not doing anything that fulfills them. I mean, they're living a life that, in my opinion, is equal to death. And so we talk about like, what do you need to accept to make life worth living? Well, I need to accept that I'm going to feel scared. I need to accept that some people are going to betray me. And that's what vulnerability requires. And vulnerability is a huge requirement of recovery, whether it's depression, anxiety, or addiction. But I have so many people who say, well, I don't want to be vulnerable because I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to be hurt. And I think they're looking for someone to tell them that you don't need to be afraid of that. That's not going to happen. I will never tell my clients that. I say, yeah, you might. In fact, you probably will. But you have to accept that to have a life worth living. It's like, I made up this metaphor lately and I think it's hitting pretty well, but it's like if you saw a tiger in a cage at a zoo, you wouldn't be like, oh, what a lucky tiger. It doesn't have to be hurt. It's never going to get eaten by any predators. It's so safe in there. What a great life it has. No, we would say, well, let's let it free out into the wild. And if someone said, well, it could be eaten, it could be attacked, you'd say, well, at least it would have a good life while it was alive. But we don't apply that to ourselves.
It's a great metaphor.
We imprison ourselves in anxiety, depression, the what ifs of the future, the what do people think of me, this I've disappointed everyone. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then we are the tiger in the cage.
That's well said. I love that.
I'm glad you approve of my metaphor.
I approve of this message. What is the worst bout of anxiety that you've personally experienced?
Honestly, there's a tie. One of them was postpartum. That was definitely biological. I think women, this is a whole nother podcast, women are not set up for success, postpartum. Families aren't. We have a long way to go there. But that was definitely one of my worst bouts of anxiety.
Yeah.
And it was very physical too. I think that's the part that's hardest when I'm working with clients is the physical aspect of anxiety, because you can control to an extent what you do when you have anxiety. You can even control to an extent your thoughts, not completely, but you can't control the physical sensations. And there's a lot of people, and I've experienced this as well, where the anxiety feels very physical. And so it's like you're not even ruminating. But there is something physically going on. And that's where medication can sometimes be of assistance, as well as making sure you're taking care of your body. Like a lot of the physical anxiety I experienced was probably because I wasn't taking care of myself very well, as well as like just, chronic illness, hormone imbalance after my son was born. And yeah, so kind of on that same line, tied with that was, when I was at the worst of my alcoholism. my anxiety was through the roof. And it was like I couldn't medicate it fast enough. And it was just a vicious cycle. And so, I saw a huge improvement in that just by cutting out the alcohol.
And say more about that. Like, what do you remember a night or an experience where it just got so out of control that,
every day.
Yeah.
So, I got to the point where, again, I knew a lot, and I knew that having a drink in the morning definitely made you an alcoholic. So I wouldn't have a drink in the morning, but I was prescribed Xanax for my anxiety. And so I knew that if I took just a half, I could feel okay in the morning. I could go do my job and, I'd feel better throughout the day. And, I'd always make these little agreements with myself, like, oh, I'm not going to drink tonight. And that's actually a product of dopamine, by the way. It creates this euphoric recall where the farther away you get from the dopamine, the more euphoric your recall of what produced that is. It's a survival mechanism. So that's why a lot of people, when they have these horrible experiences drinking, you're like, why would you go back to that? Well, that's the product, or that's the result of dopamine doing what it's supposed to do in our body, which is tell us we need whatever it is that we produce that. Anyways, there also is what's called a cortisol dump that happens after you drink, because you have this really high level of dopamine that's released when you drink or use drugs. It's manufactured. So you're getting this, like, if you imagine like a scale, petting a dog is like, low levels of dopamine that get released, or like checking an item off your to-do list if you're like me. And then you drink and it's like dopamine sky high. And because of that, your body has to balance that out. We always want to be in a state of homeostasis. So your body produces cortisol, and it produces cortisol at a very predictable time. It's usually between 2 and 4 a.m. or somewhere around that. So one of the questions I ask all of my clients who are like, I don't know if I have a problem with alcohol. I'm sure if I'm ready to get sober. I'm like, what happens in the middle of the night? Like, are you sleeping through the night? Do you wake up? And it is so common for people to be like, I wake up with this like panic attack feeling, this jolt of anxiety. My heart rate is, feels like it's through the roof. Tired but wired is another way to look at it. Now people have termed it like hangxiety, but it's like the cortisol dump happens really early in the morning. And, that's when I would kind of like pop the half of Xanax. I'd go to sleep for a little bit longer. I'd be okay enough to go to work. Right. So I think we have now all of these ways of like rectifying that, and it's not really fixing the problem. Anyways, for me, I wouldn't say like the anxiety culminated in this giant panic attack. It was more like, I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this. I can't feel awful all day and make these deals and bargains with myself that I'm not going to do what I just did just to do it again that night. And the amount of disappointment I had in myself that I was living this double life of, I'm telling people this one thing, and yet I know deep down that I'm doing exactly what I've told people not to do. And I had it, my son was 3 at the time. And I remember on Thursdays, I would always have the morning off because I worked in the evenings, and I would always take my son to daycare. And I would just cry the entire way home because I knew that I was taking him there so I could go back and go home and like take care of this anxiety hangover that I had, because I knew that I could get drunk the night before because I didn't have to work the next day and the next morning, So it was just like the insanity of it all, of like, why am I doing this? So the shame that I felt, I think that was really my bottom. When people talk about that their bottom was like prison, or, don't get me wrong, I had a lot of physical things that I didn't realize were being caused by, or at least very much made worse by the alcohol. But for me, the bottom for me was the shame. I couldn't do it anymore. And thank God I couldn't, because again, my bottom could have very easily been prison, death.
Name the thing.
Yeah.
How do I ask this question? Why do we as humans love chaos?
Oh,
You know, like, does your life ever just feel too normal now and too
yeah.
simple? And you're like, there's like this chaos that's missing that like you like, why do we love that?
100%. In fact, a lot of times, when I bring like topics to meetings, I'm like, yes, I was addicted and am addicted to alcohol and mind altering things. But like, I think deep down, I'm addicted to chaos. And it is interesting you mentioned that. And like, it's the roller coaster podcast is like, I remember seeing a podcast with, I think it was Glennon Doyle or Brene Brown, or they were on the podcast together. And I think it was Glennon Doyle's sister. She said, I've always been the lifelong perseverator. And first of all, I didn't know what that meant at first. So if you don't, that's okay. But it's like, you're constantly persevering. There's always some place you have to climb out of. And if I think back over my life, that was almost like the role in my family. I don't know that everybody in my family would agree with that, but that's how I see myself. As I look back, is like, I was the resilient one. I was the one who was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis at 12 years old, a year or two late, that had been through this miserable year. I was the one who had the alcoholic father, the parents who, were domestically violent with one another. I was the one who took care of the siblings. I was the one who, when my parents were fighting, I don't want to misrepresent that, but I just felt like I was always like kind of climbing out of something. And I was almost addicted to that feeling of resilience, like I made it through, I got to the top of the hill, right? But the problem is you can't value self-growth without problems. You can't value resiliency without some level of low. And I think for a long time, I subconsciously, and I think a lot of people do this, subconsciously create that, whether it's, being married to someone who, ended up being a lot like my father, or being attracted to someone that I wanted to fix, or, it's like, you name it. And I found a way to turn it into exactly what you talked about, which is this pattern of, that's kind of how I get my high. Now, I can't speak for everybody else, but I think anybody who grew up in an environment that was a little bit unpredictable, or a lot of it unpredictable and chaotic, like that's the familiar. And I truly believe that our brain will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. It goes back to the tiger in the cage. That was comfortable and familiar. Well, I'm real comfortable with chaos.
Yeah.
So
can you describe kind of neurologically or physiologically what's happening when somebody has a panic attack? And then like, what are the things to look for in the onset of a panic attack, and how do we stop them from happening?
Great question. I think of a panic attack as kind of layers of suffering. So another way to think about that is like anxiety about anxiety. So I believe that we have clean pain and dirty pain. I think that these are two separate concepts. I think most of us experience on a regular basis, maybe I shouldn't even say most of my clients, people who struggle with anxiety and mental health issues, have layers of suffering. And so like the clean pain, for example, might be, I went through a breakup, and so I'm having grief. I'm missing this person.
Yeah, it's hard.
Very normal human emotion, right? Mm-hmm. Layers of suffering or dirty pain is, well, I shouldn't miss them. They were abusive to me. And now I'm feeling shame about that. And I'm feeling anxious because what if I feel this forever? What if I never find somebody what if I follow this pattern for the rest of my life? What if I never,
it was probably my fault that they left me anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
So these are the layers of suffering I'm talking about.
Yep.
Is we, rather than accepting this basic, normal human emotion, we attach all of these thoughts. I kind of think about our emotions as like a magnet for unhelpful thoughts. The thoughts are the problem, not the feelings. And people with anxiety, their brains like work on overdrive. So they're constantly, that's where the fixing can be problematic. They want to figure out, how did this happen so I can make sure it doesn't happen again? Well, guess what? Grief is a part of life, and you're going to get heartbroken again in some way, shape, or form. You're going to lose someone else. So we don't have to add all these layers. We don't have to figure out if you're going to find someone. We don't have to figure out whose fault is it. We don't have to. And that's really hard. It's hard to let that go, but that's the key. So going back to your question about panic attacks, I think panic attacks are a culmination of all of this suffering, and it's anxiety about anxiety. So it's what I see with people. Someone's anxious about going to the grocery store, right? Well, they know that they have anxiety about the grocery store. So now they're anxious about being anxious.
Yep.
So rather than just accepting and saying, you know what, I'm going to be anxious, and that's okay, and I can take it with me. I have people, befriend their anxiety. They can draw it and do whatever they want. They can take it with them. And if we go into, internal family systems, which we're probably not going to have time for, but that's a little part of us. That anxiety is there to protect us. I think a lot of my anxiety came from the part of me that felt like, you've got to always be okay because your family's not. And so thank you, anxiety, for everything that you've provided me in my life when I needed it. I don't need you right now, but I am willing to take you with me. You're welcome to come to the grocery store with me. And I know that it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's okay. I can feel uncomfortable. But instead of doing that, what I see a lot of people do is they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to the grocery store and I know it's going to be awful. And what if I have a panic attack there? If they've had one, they're definitely waiting for the next. And before you know it, it's a psychological process. The symptoms, and I would never tell somebody that they're making the symptoms up. But physical symptoms, our body cannot tell what is real and what is not physically. There's been a lot of research on that, a lot of really interesting case studies I won't get into, where people have thought they were being physically hurt and actually felt physical pain when they weren't. So our brain doesn't really understand the difference. And so we literally can create very physical symptoms that emulate a heart attack, that our brain has created that for us. So I think it's a snowball, a very, very fast snowball. And I think people can get out of that if they learn to recognize the clean pain and accept the clean pain, learn to take it with them, identify it, not go down the rabbit hole of figuring out why they have it, but more just befriending it, being curious about it. Okay. Like you can come along. It's okay.
Yeah. I want to try something. So I have never occurred for myself as an anxious person until the last few years. There's a certain thing that when I'm in that environment, it's making me anxious. And I don't know why. And I've never talked to anybody about it. And so I think it'd be interesting to pretend or just do like a little mini therapy session with you, let you ask questions and see what this would look like in practice. And I'm assuming that there's people out there who are dealing with the same thing that I'm dealing with.
Yeah. So, well, for liability purposes, I just want to be clear that this is not therapy.
Yes.
Just have to say that.
We're having a conversation.
Yes.
So the situation for me is I used to love being in large groups of people. I loved it. I loved going to concerts. I loved meeting new people. I loved going to parties where there was new people and networking and building relationships. And I used to love that.
Yeah.
And now there's nothing like less that I want to do than be in a social environment where I'm meeting new people. Like I hate it. And it's like not, when I think about me at my core and my identity, that doesn't feel like me. Like I'm a people person. I love connecting with new people, but I am finding that I get anxious when I'm around new groups of people, especially large groups of people.
What's it like talking to me right now?
Very comfortable. Okay. Very natural. One-on-one feels, and even small group setting feels amazing.
Again, this is not therapy, but I would encourage you to, instead of pathologizing that, which I learned that a lot of people don't know what that means, But pathologizing means that you make it defective. You're basically taking something that's happening and you've automatically attached a meaning to it as problematic. What if we stopped looking at that as problematic? Your discomfort in large settings. What if we didn't call it anxiety? What if we instead looked at it as just information? Would that change anything for you?
I think so.
How?
I think to your previous point about making, it's like levels of anxiety, I think I've made it a bigger deal than it probably is because I vocalized it to my wife as an out to not go to public things where there's new people.
Yeah.
To be fair.
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't to say that I'm encouraging one thing or another, but I do want to put a spin on it because, again, I think one of the worst things we can do is say that something is problematic, because then we start to build up those layers of struggle and now it's become a monster, right? What if instead we normalized it? And when I say normalize, this is like such a simple thing to do with yourself. We can oftentimes do it with other people. It's very hard to do with ourselves. What if we just normalized that? And I'm going to do it in a way, like I'm going to do it for you, but I want you to consider doing it for yourself. So what I would say is, what if, because I really think this might be happening, maybe not, you can tell me, what if your values have changed over time? What if what used to fill you up does not fill you up anymore? And maybe before you were able to kind of put on a little bit more of a show, maybe you could mask it a little bit more. Yeah. And maybe as we've gotten older, at least I've noticed this in myself, especially since getting sober, one of my favorite quotes is, drinking took the edge off, but the edges were my boundaries. And now I will not put myself in uncomfortable situations when I don't belong there. And when I say belong there, I mean, do I have a good reason why I'm here? And that comes back to my values. So if I feel uncomfortable in a large group of people, oftentimes that's just simply telling me that I need to really think about why I'm here. Do these people matter to me? Am I here to support someone? And I need to anchor it around that. Okay. If I'm there to, someone's getting married. Okay. No offense to any of my people that are about to get married, but I don't like to go to weddings. Are you kidding me? Can you think of anything worse than being sober at a wedding where you barely know anyone? It sounds freaking awful. So when you're talking about, when you're talking about, going places and being uncomfortable, I'm welcome to the club. Yeah. The last time I felt comfortable in a large setting, making small talk, I was drunk. Now, when I go to places where I'm in a big group of people, I'm making sure that I have a really good reason to be there. And I've got a mission, I've got an accomplishable goal. Here's what I want to do. I want to support this person getting married. And I want them to know how absolutely happy I am for them. Yep. And once my job is done, I'm out of there. Yeah. I'm not staying, unless I really get, a wild-haired dance or something and put on a good song. I'm probably gone when I've done my job. And so I think when you get older, when you get wiser, when you start to develop depth within yourself, you become relatable to less people and less people become relatable to you. And I actually think that's a really good thing. There's a lot of people I can't be around now that I used to be able to be around. Yeah. And maybe it's that. I don't know. What do you think?
I think these are really good thoughts. And I heard a quote recently. You may have seen it on my story today. It was Matthew McConaughey, and he was talking about the difference between a good man and a nice guy. And I think I used to be a nice guy. I think I used to be somebody who would show up in social settings and environments and put on the mask and do the song and dance and kiss the babies. And I wanted everybody to be my friend and I wanted everybody to like me. And I was willing to blend in and become a chameleon to the setting because I wanted to be a part of whatever, thing was happening. And I couldn't be more different now. Right. And now it's no, I know who I am. I have like very clean and clear boundaries that aren't just intrinsic, but like people know them. And it's like, not to involve me if it involves any of these things. And if you don't know, then you will know when it happens.
Yeah.
Like when you cross into my world, especially if it involves my family, like you're going to know if it's crossing the line. Right. And so I think that's what a good man is. And I think what you're saying is that in a lot of ways.
Yes. And I'm curious how, like the next time you have something come up where you would normally feel anxiety, I'm curious what you think would change if instead you recentered on, why am I doing this? And is it okay for me to be uncomfortable if that's my goal? Like, do you think that would change anything for you? Like everything
I
that we've
could give you a
talked
great
about.
example.
Yeah.
A great example of this happened a few weeks ago. You're at my home. You got to see my backyard. That backyard is a function of we host a lot of things, right? And so it's every soccer party or dance part. Like we are the ones that get volunteered to host everything. And so we had my son's soccer team over and all their parents, who I don't know. And it was like horrific for me. And I sort of like the 2 or 3 guys that I know and that I'm like, cordial with or friendly with or whatever. It was like I just gravitated towards them and I tried to just like, hey, we're going to have our little unit and I don't want to like, So that was the experience. Now applying this, some of these thoughts that you've shared with me. I think I could probably have a much better outlook and attitude towards why we're here, which is we have a home that's worthy of hosting, that creates a really cool experience for the kids on the team. My son is one of them. He cares deeply about that. My wife is the team manager. She cares deeply about that. I need to be here to support them. And also, like, these are other human beings, Maybe you shouldn't be so like standoffish and cold towards meeting new people when like maybe there's some beautiful, meaningful connections to be had.
Yeah, sure. There could be. I also think, something you said earlier, just I see it with men all the time, and I'm not a man. So you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but this nice man to this good man idea. I see so many men who, are I don't know how old you are, but
35.
You're how old?
35.
Okay, I thought you were close to, yeah. So I think that there are men that are kind of like coming into themselves, maybe a little bit late. I don't know what you would consider late, but I think the reason it's late is because we do a lot of life things before we figure out who we are, like marry someone, have kids, things I just don't think we should be allowed to do yet. But I think part of what maybe complicates it is you start to build a life around being a nice guy. And then all of a sudden you realize you don't want to be and you can't be a nice guy anymore, because guess what happens to nice guys? Not only do they finish last, but they develop addictions. No more Mr. Nice Guy. Not sure if you've read the book.
Yep.
Fantastic. But the whole point of it is like you men, women do it too, just in a different way. You set yourself up for failure because it's not sustainable. And so how much of your life has been constructed around you being a nice guy? And maybe it's not just about, grinning your teeth and bearing it. Maybe it's about, now that I know who I am and what's really important to me, maybe I need to have some conversations with the people around me that have learned to see me in this one way. And now I've realized I'm not. I work with a lot of couples. And so I work with men who I recommend the book to. And then they start setting boundaries and their wife's like, what the heck are you doing? And it's why in the book they say, make sure your wife or your partner reads this book. Because when the man starts to set boundaries and figure out that, you know what? I don't know if this is who I am anymore. And you know what? I don't know if I'm the best person to get the groceries from the store. I'm not very detail oriented. Well, the wife or the partner's like, wait a minute, what are you doing? And they can sabotage it. So both people have to be on board. So I'm sorry to your wife in advance if this leads to anything. But I also think, this is a good opportunity for you to think about what are the events that you're like, yes, there's a really good reason for us to have people over. And I can definitely accept and take my anxiety or discomfort with me and, see what connections I can make. And that can be my goal. Maybe you change your goal from being accepted to being authentic.
Yeah.
Right. But maybe there's times when our anxiety or discomfort is telling us that, we're not who we used to be, and that's okay. We're allowed to have limits. We're allowed to not say yes to everything. There is far less that I say yes to now that I'm sober. And luckily, I say luckily because no one's going to challenge it. I can say it's because I'm sober and no one's going to be like, well, you should come anyway. They'll be like, ooh, yes, stay home. We do not want to be responsible for your relapse. But all of a sudden you just change because you want to start being true to your values and you don't get the same response. So I guess all that to say, acceptance and commitment, right? Accept that it's normal for you to want meaningful relationships instead of surface level, especially now that you've been doing this podcast. Like all you have is meaningful conversations. Like the weather doesn't interest you anymore.
Totally.
And we can commit to maybe setting some boundaries and having a goal in mind that's more value oriented.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great.
There's my advice.
Yeah,
for whatever it's worth.
I mean, that last point is really an interesting one that I think most people who meet me for the first time that I end up developing a meaningful relationship with would say that their experience of me meeting me for the first time is that I want to go all the way and I want to go there fast. And I don't want to beat around the bush because I want to see if that's who you are. Mm-hmm. And if that's who you are, then there's a chance that we could develop a relationship. And if it's not who you are, which I would say most fall into that category, probably it's like, that's not who you are, is you don't want to, because you've got insecurities and your guard up and for all kinds of reasons that I am not here to judge.
Right.
Then we're probably not ever going to get there.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to waste the time or put in the effort to try. Right. I was having this conversation with somebody recently who said, it's a friend of mine, daughter who's in her young 20s. And she said, basically like you occur for me as somebody who like wants to go really deep, really fast. She said, I'm that way as well. And that was my experience of her. And I really appreciated that. And she said, what do I do when I realize she's dating? She's trying to find her husband, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah.
And she says, what do I do when I realize in a dating relationship, a romantic relationship, that they are never going to go there? They're never going to have that kind of depth. What do I do? And I gave my response, but I want to ask you that question. Like, what do you do in that situation? Even if I was asking for me, the answer for me is like, I just don't give them the time of day. I just move on with my life. But is that the right answer to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think at some point in time, you realize it's not a good fit, And I think I am much more picky about my relationships. I mean, this kind of maybe brings me a little bit to like my divorce, but when I think part of the reason that I drank as much as I did was because it allowed me to tolerate people that I now cannot tolerate. And if I was drinking, I didn't care.
Yeah.
And again, when I got sober, it was like, I have to change the people in my life or I will be miserable. And so I don't think you just write somebody off, but I think you have to recognize that some relationships are not meant to last, and we're allowed to change. And one of my favorite metaphors that I've heard is that people are like rocket boosters, like for us to continue to grow, like we have to drop some people off sometimes. They helped us get to where we are, and now we can't move forward without them. And I see a lot of clients trying to grow and their relationships are actually sabotaging them. And it gets to almost this pivotal point of either their partner has to grow with them. They have to, I'm using partner as an example, but it could be anything.
Sure.
Partner is the most significant one, as you can imagine.
Yep.
Their partner has to be willing to grow with them. They have to separate from their partner or they stop growing. And for me, that was exactly what I was faced with when I got sober, was that I was going to either my partner was going to have to grow with me, which was a choice that he did not make at that time. And I respect him. He's allowed to make whatever choice that he made. Or I don't stay sober. I knew eventually I wasn't going to, or I'd be miserable. Sober and miserable isn't good. You know, people in dry January, there's people who don't want to be around in dry January. They're white knuckling it.
Totally.
So I knew that it was, and I gave it as long as I felt like I could. And so, yeah, I think to circle back to your question, I think it's not a fit. If the depth's not there and you know that that's a value that you have, then you say good luck to you and you find the people that you have that connection with.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes the right answers are the simplest answers.
Exactly.
Right. It's like we don't need to analyze these things.
Well, and I think that's the danger of kind of the trajectory we're going on as a society. Like, I love that mental health has become so important to people. And we've been seeing that, I think COVID was kind of like our rock bottom. It was like, and I predicted this. Okay. I just want to say for the record that the physical health piece, everybody was worried about that. And I'm like, we are screwed. Like I'm buckling down because I know that as soon as this is over, stuff's going to hit the fan, Yep. I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss on here, but
you are.
Okay. Shit's going to hit the fan, and what do you know? Like, that's not to say the physical piece was not important. Obviously, like, I know people who died from COVID, but we were neglecting the mental health piece to honor the physical. And then we saw that skyrocket. And so I think now people are like, whoa, okay, it's real. We actually do need connection. And, we do need AA meetings instead of just liquor stores being open. And so that's great. But now the pendulum is almost swinging to the other side where we're like over analyzing it and over mental health thing, whatever that word might be, people and ourselves. And now we're kind of like making normal human things into these problems. And I think your example was such a great example of that. It was like, oh my gosh, I can't do what I used to do, or I don't want to do what I used to do. And so now I must be anxious. It's like, well, no, maybe you just don't want to have soccer parties at your house every Sunday. God forbid. No offense. I'm sure that's great for some people. It wouldn't be my cup of tea either, but, I can't do those things.
Well, it's funny because I don't even think it's my wife's cup of tea. I just think she's so
maybe you
nice
both need to have a little heart to heart and see, because how much of this is image, right? Okay, we've got the nice house, or, we're the soccer manager, or do you know how many things I had to drop when I got sober because alcohol was my gasoline? I had to keep up with the Joneses. And so in order to do that, I had to keep drinking.
Oh yeah.
And then I'm like, no, I'm doing one field trip a year.
Yeah.
I'm checking that box, and yeah, do I feel guilt every single freaking day? Yeah. Every day. Because I'm a mom, and that's what moms, I think, are supposed to feel. But I accept that. I accept that living a fulfilling life, being a good mom, what I determine to be a good mom, means that I'm going to feel guilty. That doesn't mean I have to act on it.
Yeah. So I want to I know we've been going for a while here. I want to
Yeah.
wrap talking about internal family systems, because this is a topic that I knew nothing about before I started, you know, consuming some of the content that you're putting out there into the world. And obviously this is something that you care deeply about. And so I want to just sort of give you the floor and ask, like, for those who are unfamiliar, which is also me, how would you describe internal family systems, or, short IFS, in
Yeah.
your own words, and what really drew you into that being a focused part of your life?
Yeah. So it is interesting that you chose IFS, internal family systems, because it's actually kind of a more recent modality that I've been reading up on and doing more trainings on, et cetera. It's probably not my most used modality. I use a theory called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is basically the serenity prayer,
Yeah.
just researched. But IFS actually pairs really well with that, because internal family systems is this idea that we have like a family within ourselves. And I am a systems trained therapist. I was trained as a marriage and family therapist, meaning I cannot view one person without looking at their entire system. Because just like we talked about, I know somebody's going to leave the therapy room and go back into we don't live in vacuums. It would be like somebody coming in and being like, oh my gosh, like I feel so fat and ugly. And if I was like, well, don't worry about it. Like, you're beautiful. And then I send them back out as if they didn't go back out into a world that was like fat phobic. And it's like, that's ridiculous. We all live in a system that is built of our partners and our family of origin and the society at large. And I could go into that. So internal family systems essentially just takes that and breaks it down even more and says, we actually have a system within ourselves. And so it's not just systems around us, but a system within us that was formed when we were very young and continues to kind of form. But it was especially formulated within those, 0 to
Formative years.
Yeah, 18 or something like that.
Yep.
And those parts of us are largely protectors. So there are kind of 3 categories. So there are protectors, which are the parts of us that want to protect us from what IFS calls the exiles. The exiles are like the part of us that feels like we don't want to see it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want anyone else to see it. Very shameful things, so fear of abandonment might be an exile. For me, it's disappointing people. That would be an exile for me. So the things that we just would rather die than experience, essentially. And the protectors are there to help us. There are 2 types of protectors. I don't want to go into that because they're kind of confusing. But the protectors are there to say, I'm going to keep you from experiencing your exiles. Yep. Because I know how painful that is for you. And so they either do that by preventing the exiles from coming out or squashing them when they come out. So, people pleasing, being the nice guy is a protector. Not all our protectors are problematic either. That's why the guy who was a big part of it, he wrote a book called No Bad Parts, and I'm totally blanking on his name right now, but I'm sure you can look it up. And because he says that all of our parts were created to help us. And so, you have a protector of this people pleaser, right? So if I just please everyone, I don't have to disappoint anyone, and then that exile doesn't have to come out. Drinking, that was a protector. As soon as you feel like you might be disappointing someone, I can tell you exactly how to put that exile back in its place. Just drink, So it's this idea that all of our coping mechanisms, all of our behaviors, everything that we struggle with and don't struggle with, everything that makes up who we are is there to protect us. And at the center of all of that is what they call our self-energy. Which from an ACT perspective, or my other theory, that's like our values are like the core of who we are. One of my favorite questions is like, if you were to ask like your mom or your dad, like, who were you when you were little? What were the values that were very obvious about you when you were young? That's probably your self-energy. So I think about like even my son who's 7, and I'm like, oh, I see his self energy right now. And I don't ever want that to go away, but I know that he will have protectors that, will get in the way of that. But, he's goofy. He's so incredibly like mechanical in his mind, like I don't know what the value there is, but he loves to build and, those types of things. And I think about myself, like I was always very creative. I look at cards that I made when I was like 6 years old and they're so creative. I'm like, oh my gosh, like look at me. I still hold on to that self energy. So those are the things that it's like, if we're not careful, those protectors will not just cover up the exiles, but they will also cover up our self energy. We will lose those values that are at the very core of who we are. And just our radiance, our comfortability, our just who we present in this very moment, right? So yeah, I'm always curious with my clients, what are their protectors? What's their self energy? Can they identify their self energy? Sometimes it's really hidden. And so, have them do some research on that. And that's always a really fun part of the process.
Do your parts ever argue or fight? And how do you navigate when there's family drama happening in your IFS?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a very dysfunctional family in there. Nothing I'm not familiar with, But I think the goal is to like welcome everybody to the table. That's essentially the goal of IFS is like everybody has a voice. Everyone can be heard. We don't have to kick anyone out. And we can very compassionately and lovingly, have people step back and bring the self energy back to the forefront. But we do that with compassion and acceptance and curiosity. It just goes back to, what we talked about before, the paradox of actually what's going to get rid of this thing is not for us to judge it or should ourselves. It's to say like, yeah, anxiety, I know why you're here. And I know that your intentions are good and that you are trying to protect me from, maybe having to be rejected or just have discomfort in any capacity. But, I'm here to assure you that I'm an adult now and I can set boundaries. I can, I'm thinking about even your example of like being in a big crowd, right? Like maybe when you were young, as most of us were, we were told we had to put on a smile and be polite and talk to everybody, make conversation with everybody. I think about my 7-year-old and I see that happening, right? Like if he just doesn't want to talk to somebody, he like just won't talk to them. He'll just be, and of course, what's our gut instinct? Don't be rude. Talk to them. Tell them how school is. Tell them how, right? And it's like, so that is so what we're, right? But that's what we're taught. Yeah. And we're still doing it today. So now we have this protector that's like in a fight with our self energy, which is like, I want these meaningful connections and that's what I want to spend my energy on. And then you have this protector of the nice guy that's like, but what about being rejected? What if you disappoint somebody if you don't give them the time of day? What if you, right? Like Brene Brown says that as soon as she started really finding her values and her authentic self, she became a bitch to a lot of the world. And okay.
Great.
Yeah. Like if some people are going to think, and she probably had to do a lot of inner work of telling her protector, like, it's okay. I love this statement. And I say this to myself a lot. Like I am willing to be misunderstood in order to stay true to my authentic self. I am willing to be rejected in order to have good boundaries or to find my belonging or to preserve my self-energy. I call it a willingness statement. Because we're going to feel uncomfortable. Yeah. If we want that self-energy to shine, we're going to be uncomfortable. The exiles are going to come out. They're going to be seen. The protectors are too, and that's okay. But we can tell them to step back. It's okay. I'm an adult now. I can handle this. We can accept and make room for all of those things, and they'll step back, So that's IFS in a nutshell.
What's interesting about being misunderstood is I would agree with your statement, like I'm happy to be misunderstood, but I would rather be so understood and still not liked by all right? To where it's like, no, you know exactly where I'm at.
Yeah.
And like, I'm going to be like obnoxious about it.
Yeah. Have you heard of the Enneagram?
No.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm going to send you the link later
Okay.
and you can invite me back, and I don't know, some other time, and we'll talk about the Enneagram. But
Amazing.
There's a type that really likes to be understood. It's the 4. There'll be some Enneagram fans on here.
Okay. Sweet. So I'd like to close with this. I in most of my episodes, I'll have my guests actually address the audience. And so I want you to address the audience in your camera, this one here.
Okay.
And I want you to, I really love some of the connections that you've really helped open my eyes to, just around like, there's just a lot of simple concepts in here about like, yeah, just it is what it is and accept it. And maybe it's actually not a problem. And, so some of what the exercise that we went through for me was actually really useful. We live in a world of people that are hurting. We live in a world of people that have anxiety, that have depression, that have suicidal ideations. It's more prevalent than we've ever seen in the history of the world. And I don't think that's just because we have better data around it. I actually think it's really bad.
Yeah, there's a lot of things.
I would love for you to just address those out there that have crippling anxiety and depression, and they don't see a path forward except for the worst of all consequences that we've already talked about today. So
I feel like that's a large order. First of all, I would say that every single thing that you feel is not bad. There's nothing bad that you're feeling, nothing abnormal that you're feeling. It feels uncomfortable, but it's not wrong. Every single one of our feelings is allowed and has to be allowed. I also think that you are worthy of getting help. I think there's a narrative that therapy is not affordable, that there's not resources out there to help people, and there absolutely is. You may have to do some digging, but I want everyone to know that you are not hopeless. Like, there is 100% hope. I help people every single day with crippling anxiety. I run an intensive outpatient program where people cannot leave their house. The only reason they're leaving their house is to come to this program, and I see them get better. And so I guess I just want everyone to know that like help is possible. It's out there through acceptance, connection, seeking help. With all the information we have that's hurting us, use it to help you, and find someone in person, preferably, that can help. That would be my message.
Amazing. Rachael DeConing, thank you for joining the Roller Coaster Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, that's a wrap.